The dust-choked streets of Bozeman, Montana Territory seemed especially quiet on the morning Penelope Edwards turned 38, though she supposed that had more to do with the hour than any cosmic significance the day might hold. She stood behind the counter of her general store, watching the sun creep over the Bridger Mountains through the wavering glass of her front window, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Outside, a lone rider moved slowly down Main Street, leading a pack mule laden with supplies, and for just a moment, Penelope allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where she might have been waiting for such a man to come home to her. But that was foolishness, the kind of thinking that led nowhere good. She had learned long ago that dreams were dangerous things, especially for women who had passed what the town considered marriageable age. At 25, she had been pitied. At 30, she had been the subject of hushed speculation about what must be wrong with her. Now, at 38, she had become invisible to most folks, just another fixture of Bozeman like the false-fronted buildings and the hitching posts that lined the streets. "You are wool gathering again," came a voice from behind her, and Penelope turned to find her younger sister Margaret standing in the doorway that led to the back storage room. Margaret was 32, married to a decent rancher named Thomas, and mother to 3 healthy children. She visited the store twice a week, ostensibly to help with inventory, but really, Penelope suspected, to make sure her spinster sister had not completely given up on life. "Just watching the morning come in," Penelope said, finally setting down the cold coffee. "Did you bring the eggs?" 2 dozen, just like you asked." Margaret moved into the store proper, her skirts swishing against the wooden floorboards. "Thomas said to tell you he will have that beef ready by Friday if you still want it for the store." "I do. Tell him thank you." Margaret studied her sister for a long moment, her eyes narrowing in that way that meant she was about to say something Penelope would not want to hear. "You know, Sarah Thompson mentioned at church last Sunday that her cousin is coming to visit from Denver. He is a widower, 42 years old, owns a small freight company." "Margaret, I am just saying that you should not close yourself off to possibilities. You are still a handsome woman, Penelope. Your hair may have some gray in it now, but your face is lovely, and you have this store, which means you are not without means. Some men find that attractive." Penelope turned away, busying herself with straightening a display of canned goods that did not need straightening. "Some men find it threatening. Besides, I am content with my life as it is." "Content is not the same as happy." "Perhaps not, but it is enough." Margaret sighed, a sound full of sisterly exasperation and love. "You have been saying that since you were 30 years old, and I have never believed it. You deserve more than just enough, Penelope. You deserve to be loved." Before Penelope could respond, the bell above the store's front door jangled, announcing the arrival of a customer. Both women turned, and Penelope felt her breath catch unexpectedly in her throat. The man who entered was tall, perhaps 6 feet or slightly more, with broad shoulders that filled out his dusty trail coat. But it was his hair that caught her attention first, a thick silver gray that caught the morning light streaming through the window. He could not have been much older than 45, she guessed, despite the silver hair, because his face was relatively unlined, and his movements had the easy grace of a man in his prime. His eyes, when they found hers, were a startling blue-gray, the color of storm clouds over the mountains. "Morning, ladies," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in Penelope's chest. "Hope I am not intruding. Sign out front says you open at 6, and I am in need of some supplies." "Not at all," Penelope managed, her professional demeanor sliding into place despite the unexpected flutter in her stomach. "What can I help you find? beans, bacon, coffee, and flour to start. I am setting up camp outside of town for a few weeks, maybe longer, and I need to stock my larder." He moved further into the store, and Penelope noticed the way he walked with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. There was a quiet confidence about him, the kind that came from a man who knew his own capabilities and did not feel the need to prove anything to anyone. Margaret, bless her meddlesome heart, chose that moment to make herself useful. "I will just go check on that inventory in the back room," she announced, far too loudly, and disappeared before Penelope could protest. Left alone with the stranger, Penelope felt suddenly awkward, which was ridiculous. She had been running this store for 12 years, ever since their father died and left it to her. She dealt with strangers every day. There was no reason this man should make her feel like a green girl of 16. "Beans are on the shelf behind you," she said, pointing. "Bacon and flour I will need to get from the storeroom. How much coffee do you need? 5 pounds should do me." He was already moving toward the beans, scanning the shelves with an experienced eye. "You have a well-stocked store, Miss Edwards, Penelope Edwards, and thank you, I try to keep a good variety of goods." "I can see that. I am Caleb Porter, in case you were wondering. Most folks call me Cal." "It is nice to meet you, Mr. Porter. What brings you to Bozeman?" He selected several cans of beans, carrying them back to the counter with ease. "I am a horse trainer by trade. The Miller Ranch, about 5 miles north of here, hired me to break and train a string of Mustangs they brought in last month. Good horses, wild as the wind, but they will be worth good money once they are trained proper." Penelope nodded, moving toward the storeroom to gather the bacon and flour. She knew the Miller Ranch well. They bought most of their dry goods from her. "The Millers are good people. You will be treated fairly there." "That is what I heard, which is why I took the job." He followed her with his eyes as she moved around the store, and she felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing. "Have you run this store long, Miss Edwards?" 12 years. "It was my father's before that. Must be a good bit of work for one person. I manage." She set the flour and bacon on the counter, then moved to measure out the coffee from the large bin she kept behind the register. "Will you be needing anything else?" Caleb Porter looked at her for a long moment, and Penelope found herself unable to look away. There was something in his expression that she could not quite read, a kind of thoughtfulness that made her feel both seen and exposed in a way that was not entirely uncomfortable. "I will likely need more supplies in a week or so," he said finally. "Would it be all right if I came back then?" "Of course. I am open every day except Sunday." He nodded, pulling out a worn leather wallet to pay for his purchases. His hands, she noticed, were calloused and scarred, the hands of a man who worked hard for his living. When his fingers brushed hers as he handed over the money, she felt a spark of something she had not felt in years, something she had thought herself too old and too practical to feel anymore. Margaret chose that moment to reappear, her eyes bright with barely suppressed curiosity. "Did you find everything you need, Mr. Porter?" "Caleb Porter, and yes, your sister has been very helpful." "Wonderful. Penelope is excellent at what she does. Best store in Bozeman, everyone says so." Penelope shot her sister a warning look, but Margaret just smiled innocently. Caleb gathered his purchases, tipping his hat to both women. "I appreciate the service, ladies. I am sure I will see you again soon, Miss Edwards." When he was gone, the store seeming suddenly dimmer without his presence, Margaret practically pounced. "Did you see the way he looked at you?" "He looked at me like a customer looks at a shopkeeper." "He absolutely did not. He looked at you like a man looks at a woman he finds attractive." "Margaret, please. He is probably just a friendly person." "Friendly, yes, but there was something more there. And Penelope, did you see his hair? Silver as moonlight, and him not even 50 yet, I would wager. distinguished-looking, do you not think? Penelope busied herself putting away the money, trying to ignore the warmth that had settled in her cheeks. I did not particularly notice. You are such a terrible liar. Margaret came around the counter, taking her sister's hands in hers. Promise me you will not shut yourself off if he shows interest. Promise me you will give him a chance. Margaret, he is a stranger who bought some supplies. That is all. But even as she said the words, Penelope could not shake the memory of those storm cloud eyes, or the way her heart had stuttered when he smiled. The week that followed passed with agonizing slowness. Penelope told herself she was not watching for Caleb Porter, that she was not listening for the jangle of the doorbell with more attention than usual, that she was not disappointed each time someone other than a silver-haired horse trainer entered her store. She told herself these things, but she did not quite believe them. News traveled fast in a town the size of Bozeman, and by the end of the week, she had heard plenty about the new horse trainer at the Miller Ranch. According to Sarah Thompson, whose husband worked as a hand there, Caleb Porter was a miracle worker with horses. He had a gentle way about him, could calm even the wildest Mustang with nothing but patience and soft words. He had served in the war between the states on the Union side and had been injured at Gettysburg, which explained the limp. He had been married once long ago, but his wife had died of fever, and he had never remarried. This last bit of information came from Margaret, who had made it her mission to learn everything she could about Caleb Porter, and who reported her findings with the enthusiasm of a detective solving a particularly interesting case. Widowed for nearly 15 years, Margaret said as they took inventory on Saturday afternoon. Never had children with his wife, though apparently he wanted them. He has spent the last decade moving from ranch to ranch, training horses. People say he is the best in Montana Territory. That is all very interesting, Penelope said, counting tins of tobacco with more attention than the task required. But I am not sure why you are telling me all this. Because he is coming back to the store. I know he is. And when he does, I think you should talk to him, really talk to him. Margaret, I am 38 years old. I am past the age where I entertain romantic fancies. Who says? Margaret's voice had gone sharp the way it did when she was truly frustrated. Who decided that 38 is too old for love? Because I certainly did not, and I do not think you did either. Not really. I think other people decided that for you, and you have just gone along with it because it is easier than hoping for something and being disappointed. The words hit harder than Penelope expected, and she set down her pencil, looking at her sister directly. What do you want me to say, Margaret? That I am lonely? That I lie awake some nights and wonder what my life might have been like if things had been different? Fine, I admit it. But that does not change reality. I am who I am, and this is the life I have. It does not have to be. Margaret moved closer, her expression softening. You are not too old, Penelope. You are beautiful and intelligent and kind, and any man would be lucky to have you. But you have to let yourself believe that first. You have to stop listening to the voices in this town that say you are past your prime. Before Penelope could respond, the bell above the door rang, and both women turned. Caleb Porter stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands, his silver hair slightly mussed from the wind. "Hope I am not interrupting," he said, and his eyes found Penelope's immediately, as if he had been looking for her specifically. "Not at all," Penelope said, her voice coming out steadier than she felt. "We were just finishing up inventory. I can come back later if this is a bad time." "No, it is fine. What can I help you with?" He moved into the store, and Penelope noticed that his limp was slightly more pronounced today, as if he had been on his feet more than usual. "I need some more coffee, and some liniment if you have it." I have been working with a particularly stubborn Mustang this week, and he got the better of me yesterday. Are you hurt? The question came out before Penelope could stop herself, concern coloring her tone. Caleb's expression warmed. Just some bruises, nothing serious. Occupational hazard when you work with wild horses. Margaret, who had been watching this exchange with barely concealed delight, suddenly announced, I just remembered I promised Thomas I would be home early today. Penelope, you can handle closing up the store by yourself, cannot you? Margaret, but her sister was already gathering her things, moving toward the door with suspicious speed. It was nice to see you again, Mr. Porter. Penelope will take good care of you. And then she was gone, leaving Penelope alone with Caleb Porter for the second time. An awkward silence fell, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall and the distant sound of wagons passing outside. Caleb cleared his throat, and when Penelope looked at him, she saw a hint of amusement in his eyes. Your sister is not very subtle, is she? He said. Despite herself, Penelope laughed. No, she is not. I apologize. She means well, but she has a tendency to meddle. No apology needed. I have 3 sisters of my own, all married, all convinced that I am lonely and in need of their matchmaking efforts. He set his hat on the counter, running a hand through his silver hair. Truth be told, I've gotten used to the meddling over the years. Sometimes it is even endearing. Only sometimes, he agreed, and they shared a smile that felt surprisingly comfortable. Penelope moved to gather the coffee and liniment, and Caleb followed her with his eyes. You know, he said, his tone casual but his words clearly considered. I have been thinking about what you said last week, about managing the store by yourself. It seems like it would be lonely work sometimes. I am used to it. Used to something and enjoying it are not the same thing. She turned to look at him, finding his gaze steady and direct. No, they are not, but we all make our peace with the lives we have, do we not? Sometimes. Other times we find the courage to change those lives. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning that Penelope was not quite ready to examine. She set the coffee and liniment on the counter, measuring her words carefully. Change is not always easy, especially when you have been living a certain way for a long time. Nothing worth having is easy. He paid for his purchases, but made no move to leave. Miss Edwards, I hope I am not being too forward, but would you consider having dinner with me tomorrow evening? I know a decent restaurant just opened up over on Mendenhall Street, and I would appreciate the company. No strings, no expectations, just 2 people sharing a meal and conversation. Penelope's heart stuttered in her chest. It had been so long since anyone had asked her to dinner. So long since anyone had looked at her the way Caleb Porter was looking at her now, as if she was a woman worth knowing, worth spending time with. The old fears rose up immediately. The voices that told her she was too old for this, that she would only be disappointed, that it was better to keep to herself and not risk the pain of rejection. But underneath those fears was something else, something that felt like hope, fragile and tentative but real nonetheless. I would like that, she heard herself say, and the smile that broke across Caleb's face made her feel as if she had just done something incredibly brave. Really? That is wonderful. Should I come by around 6 o'clock? 6 would be perfect. He gathered his purchases, his movements unhurried as if he was reluctant to leave. I will see you tomorrow then, Miss Edwards. Penelope, she said impulsively. You can call me Penelope. Penelope, he repeated, and her name in his deep voice sounded like something precious. I am looking forward to it. After he left, Penelope stood behind the counter for a long time, her hands trembling slightly, her mind racing. She was 38 years old, and she had just agreed to have dinner with a man. A handsome, silver-haired man who looked at her as if she mattered. It terrified her. It thrilled her. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, not knowing whether the fall would destroy her or teach her to fly. That night, lying in bed in the small apartment above the store, Penelope allowed herself to imagine what tomorrow might bring. She had not let herself think this way in years, had trained herself to be practical and sensible and content with solitude. But now, with the memory of Caleb Porter's smile fresh in her mind, she felt something long dormant stirring inside her. Maybe Margaret was right. Maybe 38 was not too old for love, for new beginnings, for taking chances. Maybe all those voices that had told her otherwise were wrong, and she had wasted too many years listening to them. Or maybe this would end in disappointment and heartbreak, and she would prove to herself once and for all that some dreams were better left unrealized. But either way, she was going to that dinner. She was going to take this chance, however small, however terrifying. Because if there was one thing she had learned in 38 years, it was that regret tasted more bitter than disappointment ever could. Sunday dawned clear and cold, the kind of October day that hinted at the harsh winter to come. Penelope woke early, despite having lain awake half the night, and found herself at loose ends. The store was closed on Sundays, which normally gave her a day to rest, to read, to take walks through town or visit Margaret and her family. But today, with the dinner looming in the evening, she could not seem to settle to anything. She cleaned the apartment, which was already spotless. She tried to read, but the words swam meaninglessly across the page. She attempted to occupy herself with mending, but pricked her finger 3 times in as many minutes and finally gave up. At 2 o'clock, Margaret appeared at her door, arms full of dresses and her face alight with excitement. "I knew you would need help," she declared, pushing past Penelope into the apartment. "You have been wearing the same 3 work dresses for years, and while they are perfectly serviceable for running a store, they are not what you should wear to dinner with a handsome man." "Margaret, No arguments. I brought some of my nicest dresses and we are going to find one that fits you, then I am going to help you with your hair." Despite her nervousness, Penelope found herself smiling. "You are impossible. I am helpful. There is a difference." They spent the next hour going through the dresses Margaret had brought, most of which had to be adjusted to fit Penelope's slightly taller frame. Finally, they settled on a deep blue dress with a modest neckline and fitted bodice that made Penelope's gray-streaked brown hair look rich and lustrous rather than faded. As Margaret worked on her hair, pinning it up in a style that was elegant without being overly fussy, she chatted about everything and nothing, clearly trying to keep Penelope from spiraling into anxiety. "Thomas says that Caleb Porter is well respected at the ranch," Margaret said, carefully placing a pin. "He treats the horses with kindness, never loses his temper even when they are difficult. Thomas says that is a sign of good character, being patient with animals. I suppose it is. And Sarah Thompson told me that he has been asking questions about you. Apparently, he wanted to know if you were spoken for, if you had any gentlemen callers." "Margaret, I am just telling you what I heard. He is interested in you, Penelope, truly interested. You can see it in the way he looks at you." Penelope met her sister's eyes in the mirror. "I am terrified," she admitted quietly. "I do not know how to do this. It has been so long since anyone looked at me that way, and even then it never led anywhere. What if I am too awkward? What if I say the wrong thing? What if he realizes I am just a lonely woman who runs a store and has no idea how to be charming or interesting?" Margaret set down the hairpins and placed her hands on Penelope's shoulders. "Listen to me. You are interesting and charming just by being yourself. You have kept a business running for 12 years in a frontier town. You have done it on your own without a husband or father to help you. You are intelligent and kind, and you have a good sense of humor when you let yourself relax. Any man would be lucky to know you, Penelope. But you have to believe that yourself. I am trying, I know. And I am proud of you for agreeing to this dinner. That took courage. At precisely 6 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Penelope's heart leaped into her throat, and she looked at Margaret with panic in her eyes. "You will be fine," Margaret whispered, squeezing her hand. "Just be yourself." Penelope opened the door to find Caleb Porter standing on the landing, and her breath caught at the sight of him. He had cleaned up since she saw him last, his silver hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. He wore a clean white shirt under a dark vest and jacket, and he held his hat in his hands with an almost nervous energy. When he saw her, his eyes widened slightly, and a slow smile spread across his face. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and the sincerity in his voice made Penelope's cheeks warm. "Thank you. You look very nice as well." Margaret appeared behind Penelope, her smile bright enough to light the entire Montana territory. "Good evening, Mr. Porter. I trust you will have my sister home at a reasonable hour." "Margaret," Penelope hissed, mortified, but Caleb just laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "I will take good care of her, I promise. See that you do." The walk to the restaurant was both the longest and shortest of Penelope's life. They moved slowly, accommodating Caleb's limp, and talked about small things, safe things. The weather, the town, the changes that had come to Bozeman in recent years. The conversation was easy, comfortable, and Penelope found some of her nervousness beginning to fade. The restaurant was small but clean, with red checked tablecloths and candles on each table. It was still relatively early, so they had their choice of seating. Caleb led her to a table near the window, pulling out her chair with old-fashioned courtesy that made Penelope feel special in a way she had almost forgotten was possible. "I have to admit," Caleb said once they were settled and had ordered their meals, "I was half afraid you would change your mind about tonight." "I almost did," Penelope said honestly. "Several times, in fact." "What stopped you?" She considered the question, wanting to give him an honest answer. "My sister, partly. She has been trying to convince me that I am not too old for this sort of thing. This sort of thing being dinner with a gentleman. This sort of thing being any kind of romantic interest at all." The words came out more candidly than she intended, and she felt color rise in her cheeks. "I am sorry, that was too forward. Not at all. I appreciate the honesty." Caleb leaned back in his chair, studying her with those storm cloud eyes. "For what it is worth, I think the idea that there is an age limit on love or companionship is nonsense. I am 46 years old. My hair went gray when I was 32 after an illness. I limp from an old war injury. By most people's standards, I am past my prime. But I do not feel that way, and I do not think you should either. The town has opinions about unmarried women my age. The town has opinions about everything. The question is whether you are going to let those opinions dictate your life." Their food arrived, interrupting the conversation, but Caleb's words stayed with Penelope. As they ate, he steered the discussion to lighter topics, asking about her store, her life in Bozeman, the things she enjoyed. She found herself relaxing further, drawn in by his genuine interest and easy manner. "What about you?" she asked as they finished their meal. "What made you become a horse trainer?" "I grew up on a farm in Pennsylvania," he said, his expression turning thoughtful. "We always had horses, and I had a way with them even as a boy. After the war, after I lost my wife, I found I did not want to stay in one place. The horses gave me a reason to keep moving, to see new places, and I am good at what I do. There is satisfaction in that. But it is a lonely life, is it not? Always moving from place to place, it can be. But then, staying in one place can be lonely too if you are living it alone. Their eyes met across the table, and Penelope felt something shift inside her, like a door opening onto a room she had kept locked for too long. "Penelope," Caleb said, his voice lower now, more intimate. "I hope you do not mind me saying this, but I have not been able to stop thinking about you since I walked into your store last week. There is something about you, a quiet strength, a gentleness, that I find remarkable. I know we have only just met, and I know that courting at our age is perhaps not what society expects, but I would very much like to get to know you better, if you are willing." Penelope's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. All her old fears clamored for attention, telling her to be careful, to protect herself, to not hope for too much. But underneath those fears was a deeper truth, one she had been ignoring for too long. She was lonely. She did want companionship, love, someone to share her life with. And this man, this kind, thoughtful, silver-haired man, was offering her exactly that. "I would like that too," she said, and watched as relief and joy washed across his face. They talked for another hour, until the restaurant owner started giving them pointed looks, and they realized they were the only customers left. Caleb paid for the meal over Penelope's protests, and they walked back to her apartment slowly, neither of them seeming to want the evening to end. At her door, Caleb took her hand gently in his. "May I call on you again? Perhaps we could take a walk next Sunday if the weather holds." "I would like that very much." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth rushing through her entire body. "Thank you for this evening, Penelope. It was more wonderful than I could have hoped. Thank you for asking me." She watched from her window as he walked away, his figure gradually disappearing into the darkness. Her hand still tingled where he had kissed it, and she felt lighter than she had in years, as if some great weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Maybe, just maybe, it was not too late for her after all. The next few weeks passed in a blur of carefully orchestrated meetings and stolen moments. Caleb came to the store twice a week, always with some excuse about needing supplies, though they both knew he was coming just to see her. They talked while she worked, easy conversations that ranged from the mundane to the profound. He told her about the horses he was training, describing their personalities with such affection that she could not help but smile. She told him about running the store, the challenges and satisfactions of being a businesswoman in a frontier town. On Sundays, they took long walks together, exploring the outskirts of Bozeman, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about his years in the war, about losing his wife, about the long years he had spent moving from place to place, looking for something he could not quite name. She told him about her own loneliness, about the weight of being the unmarried sister, the spinster shopkeeper that everyone pitied. "I stopped letting myself hope for this," she confessed one Sunday as they sat by a creek, watching the water rush over smooth stones. "I convinced myself that I was content with my life as it was, that I did not need anyone." "And now," Caleb asked, his shoulder warm against hers, "now I realize I was lying to myself. I do need someone, I need you." He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I need you too, Penelope." More than I realized someone could need another person. Word of their courtship spread through Bozeman like wildfire, as such things always did in small towns. Penelope heard the whispers when she walked down the street, saw the curious looks and raised eyebrows. Some people were happy for her, like Margaret, who practically glowed with satisfaction. Others were less kind, muttering about old fools and how it was unseemly for people their age to be courting like youngsters. Penelope tried not to let the negative voices bother her, but they did, more than she wanted to admit. One afternoon, when she was working in the store, Mildred Harrison came in, a woman known throughout Bozeman for her sharp tongue and sharper opinions. "I heard you are keeping company with that horse trainer," Mildred said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Is that wise at your age, Penelope? You are too old to be chasing after men like some silly girl." The words hit like a slap, and Penelope felt her face burn. Before she could formulate a response, Caleb's voice came from behind Mildred. "With all due respect, Mrs. Harrison, I believe that is between Penelope and myself." He had entered the store so quietly that neither woman had heard him. Now he moved to stand beside Penelope, his presence solid and supportive. "And for what it is worth, I do not think there is such a thing as being too old for love. Do you?" Mildred's face turned an interesting shade of red. "Well, I never." "Then perhaps you should start," Caleb said pleasantly. "Good day to you, madam." After Mildred left in a huff, Penelope found herself fighting between embarrassment and gratitude. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did. No one gets to speak to you that way, Penelope. You have done nothing wrong. We have done nothing wrong. People talk." "People always talk. That does not mean we have to listen." She looked up at him, this kind, strong man who had somehow found his way into her life and her heart. "How do you do it? How do you not care what people think?" "I spent too many years caring what people thought, and it made me miserable. Then I realized that the only opinions that matter are my own and the people I love." He took her hands in his expression serious. "Penelope, I am falling in love with you. I probably have been since the moment I walked into this store and saw you standing behind the counter with the morning light in your hair. And I do not care if people think we are too old, or that it is strange, or whatever other nonsense they want to spout. I know what I feel, and I am too old to waste time pretending otherwise." Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered, "and it terrifies me. Love is terrifying, but it is also wonderful, and I think we both deserve to have something wonderful in our lives." He kissed her then, right there in the store where anyone walking by could see, and Penelope did not care. She kissed him back, pouring all her hope and fear and love into that kiss, and when they finally pulled apart, she was smiling. "People are definitely going to talk about that," she said. "Let them." November brought snow to Bozeman, covering the town in a blanket of white that made everything look clean and new. Caleb finished his work at the Miller Ranch, having successfully trained the string of Mustangs to saddle. The ranch owner was so pleased that he offered Caleb a permanent position, but Caleb declined. "I have been a wanderer for too long," he told Penelope one evening as they sat in her apartment, drinking coffee and watching the snow fall outside. "But I think I am ready to stop wandering now. If you will have me." Penelope set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I love you, Penelope Edwards. I am saying that I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you will let me. I know I do not have much to offer. I have some savings, and I am good at what I do, so I can make a living. But I do not have land or a fancy house or anything that most women expect from a husband. Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am." "I know it is fast, and I know we are both past the age where most people marry, but I have wasted enough time in my life. I do not want to waste any more. I love you, and I want to build a life with you, here in Bozeman. I can help with the store, and I can take training jobs at nearby ranches. We can make it work if you are willing." Penelope felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears this time. All her life, she had been told she was too old, too plain, too independent for any man to want her. And here was this wonderful man, this silver-haired cowboy with kind eyes and a gentle soul, telling her that he loved her, that he wanted to marry her. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." Caleb's face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "You have just made me the happiest man in Montana territory," he murmured into her hair. They told Margaret the next day, and she burst into tears, hugging Penelope so hard she could barely breathe. Thomas shook Caleb's hand and welcomed him to the family. Even Margaret's children were excited. The 2 girls and 1 boy chattering about the wedding and when it would be and could they be part of it. The wedding was set for the first week of December, a small affair at the church with just family and a few close friends. Penelope wore a simple gray dress that Margaret helped her make, and Caleb wore his best suit, his silver hair gleaming in the candlelight. When the preacher asked if anyone objected to the marriage, there was a tense moment of silence. Penelope held her breath, half expecting Mildred Harrison or one of the other gossips to stand up and voice their disapproval. But no one said a word, and the ceremony continued. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said, and Caleb did, sweetly and thoroughly, to the applause of their small gathering of loved ones. The reception was held at Margaret and Thomas's house, a cheerful affair with good food and better company. As Penelope danced with her new husband in the small living room, surrounded by people who loved them, she felt a joy so profound it almost hurt. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked, his arms around her waist as they swayed to the music. "I am thinking that I spent so many years believing I was too old for this, that this kind of happiness was not meant for me. And I am thinking how glad I am that I was wrong. You were not the only one who was wrong. Everyone who told you that you were too old, who made you feel less than you are, they were all wrong too. And I intend to spend the rest of my life proving that to you. I love you," she said, the words coming easily now, naturally. "I love you too, more than I thought I could love anyone." They spent their wedding night in the apartment above the store, which would be their home until they could build something larger. It was not fancy or grand, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. In the days and weeks that followed, they settled into married life with surprising ease. Caleb helped in the store, his presence making the work lighter and more enjoyable. He took on training jobs at nearby ranches, his reputation growing as word spread of his skill with horses. Penelope found that having someone to share her life with made everything brighter, even the mundane tasks of running a business. The gossips of Bozeman eventually found other things to talk about, and Penelope stopped caring what they thought anyway. She was happy, truly happy for the first time in her life, and no amount of small-minded judgment could diminish that. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and coaxing green shoots from the frozen ground. On a warm April morning, Penelope woke feeling queasy, and by afternoon she knew. She was 49 years old, her courses had been irregular for years, and she had assumed that motherhood was another door that had closed for her. Apparently, she was wrong about that too. When she told Caleb that evening, he stared at her in stunned silence for a long moment. Then he let out a whoop of joy that probably woke half the town, sweeping her up in his arms and spinning her around despite his limp. "A baby," he kept saying, over and over. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Penelope asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. Happy does not even begin to cover it. "Penelope, I never thought I would be a father. I wanted children with my first wife, but she died before we could have them, and I assumed that part of my life was over. But now, with you, I get a second chance at everything." The pregnancy was not easy. At her age, there were complications and concerns, times when Penelope feared she would lose the baby. But Caleb was there through all of it, patient and supportive, rubbing her feet when they swelled, holding her hair when she was sick, talking to her belly late at night when she could not sleep. Margaret was beside herself with excitement and worry in equal measure, fussing over Penelope like a mother hen. The doctor, a kind man named Harrison who was no relation to Mildred, assured them that while the pregnancy was high risk, both mother and baby seemed healthy. In late November, as the first snows of winter began to fall, Penelope went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when even the doctor looked worried. But Caleb stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, refusing to leave even when the doctor suggested he might be more comfortable waiting downstairs. Finally, as dawn broke over the snow-covered mountains, a baby's cry filled the room. Penelope, exhausted and drenched in sweat, looked up through tears to see the doctor holding a squalling, red-faced infant. "It is a boy," the doctor announced, his face breaking into a smile. "A healthy baby boy." Caleb was crying openly as he looked at his son for the first time, his face a mixture of awe and overwhelming joy. When the doctor placed the baby in Penelope's arms, she felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "Hello, little one," she whispered, touching the baby's tiny fingers. "We have been waiting so long for you." They named him Charles after Caleb's father, and he was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a shock of dark hair that would likely turn silver early like his father's, and lungs that could wake the dead when he wanted to be fed. The first months were exhausting. Penelope had not realized how much work a baby required, and at 40 years old, she found the sleepless nights particularly challenging. But Caleb was a devoted father, walking the floor with Charles when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, singing lullabies in his deep voice until the baby fell asleep on his chest. Margaret visited almost daily, bringing food and advice and helping however she could. She delighted in having a new nephew, and her own children adored their baby cousin. As Charles grew, Penelope watched Caleb blossom in his role as a father in a way that filled her with joy. He was patient and gentle, teaching their son about horses before the boy could even walk, telling him stories about the mountains and the frontier, showing him how to be kind and strong and good. The store continued to thrive, with Caleb taking on more of the daily responsibilities so Penelope could spend time with Charles. They hired a young woman named Emma to help with some of the work, a quiet girl from a struggling family who was grateful for steady employment. When Charles was 2 years old, Penelope discovered she was pregnant again. The news was both joyful and terrifying, given her age and the difficulties of the first pregnancy. But this time, things went more smoothly. At 42 years old, she gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine, a tiny thing with her father's storm cloud eyes and her mother's brown hair. "Our family is complete," Caleb said one evening as they sat together on the porch they had added to the store building, watching Charles play in the yard while Catherine slept in her mother's arms. "I never thought I would have this, Penelope. A wife I love, children, a home. You gave me all of it." "We gave it to each other," Penelope corrected, leaning against him. "I never thought I would have this either. Everyone told me I was too old, that my chance had passed, but they were wrong. They were very wrong." The years passed with the sweet, steady rhythm of a happy life. Charles grew into a thoughtful boy who loved horses as much as his father did. Catherine was spirited and clever, keeping her parents on their toes with her endless questions and boundless energy. The store continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful businesses in Bozeman. Caleb's reputation as a horse trainer spread throughout Montana Territory and beyond, and he was offered jobs from ranches as far away as Wyoming and Dakota Territory. But he turned them all down, preferring to take local work that allowed him to be home with his family every night. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Caleb surprised Penelope with a gift. "Close your eyes," he instructed, taking her hand and leading her outside. When she opened them, she saw a beautiful chestnut mare standing in front of the store, saddled and ready to ride. "She is gentle as a lamb," Caleb said. "I have been training her for months. I thought it was time you learned to ride properly so we could take rides together as a family." Tears filled Penelope's eyes. "She is beautiful, not as beautiful as you." They kissed, right there on Main Street in full view of anyone who might be watching, and Penelope did not care. She had spent too many years caring what other people thought, hiding her true self behind walls of propriety and fear. She would not waste another moment of the precious life she had been given. That summer, the whole family took long rides into the mountains, with Charles proudly riding his own pony, and Catherine secure in front of her father on his steady gelding. They picnicked by alpine lakes, picked wildflowers in mountain meadows, and watched the sun set over the peaks that surrounded their home. "I am so happy," Penelope said one evening as they rode back to town, her children's laughter floating on the wind. "I did not know life could be this good." "Neither did I," Caleb admitted. "But I do now, and I am grateful for every single day." As the children grew older, Charles began helping his father with the horses, showing the same natural talent and patience that Caleb possessed. Catherine, meanwhile, showed an aptitude for business, often helping her mother in the store and demonstrating a head for numbers that impressed everyone. When Penelope turned 50, the whole town turned out for a celebration that Margaret organized. It was a far cry from the lonely birthdays she had spent in her 30s, when she had been pitied as an old maid. Now she was surrounded by love and family, a successful businesswoman and devoted mother, the wife of a man who adored her. "Make a wish," Caleb said as she prepared to blow out the candles on her cake, but Penelope just shook her head, smiling. "I do not need to wish for anything. I have everything I could ever want right here." The years continued to roll by, bringing with them the usual joys and sorrows of life. Margaret's husband, Thomas, passed away after a brief illness when Penelope was 53, and she grieved with her sister, grateful that she had Caleb's steady presence to lean on during the difficult time. Margaret moved into a small house near the store, and the two sisters grew even closer, their bond strengthened by shared experience and deep affection. Charles, at 18, announced his intention to start his own horse training business with his father. He was a skilled rider and trainer, patient like Caleb, but with his own unique approach. Father and son became partners, their combined reputation making them the most sought-after horse trainers in the territory. Catherine, at 16, showed no interest in marriage despite several young men in town vying for her attention. "I am too young," she declared. "And besides, I want to help Mother with the store, maybe even expand it someday, open another location in Virginia City." Penelope could not have been prouder of her children. They were good people, kind and hardworking and full of dreams. She and Caleb had given them a solid foundation, and now they were watching them grow into their own. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Caleb woke Penelope before dawn. "Come with me," he said. "I want to show you something." They rode out to the place where they had first picnicked as a family, a beautiful meadow high in the mountains with a view that stretched for miles. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. 20 years ago," Caleb said, his arm around her waist as they stood watching the sunrise, "I walked into a general store in Bozeman, and my life changed forever. You gave me everything I had been looking for, Penelope. Love, family, a home, a purpose. You made me whole." "You did the same for me," Penelope said, leaning into him. "I was half a person before I met you, just going through the motions of life. You taught me that it is never too late to be happy, never too late to find love. You remember what people said when we started courting? That we were too old, that it was foolish. I remember. I also remember deciding that they were wrong. They were very wrong." He turned her to face him, his storm cloud eyes as bright and loving as they had been that first day in the store. "Thank you for taking a chance on a silver-haired cowboy with a limp and a wandering past. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me. Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked right past me. Thank you for loving me when I had almost stopped believing anyone would." They kissed as the sun rose over the mountains. Two people who had found each other late in life and built something beautiful together. Two people who had proven that love knows no age limit, that it is never too late for new beginnings, that the best chapters of life can come when you least expect them. As they rode back to town, Penelope thought about the woman she had been at 38, lonely and resigned to a life alone, convinced by the voices around her that she was too old for love and marriage. She thought about how close she had come to turning Caleb away that first day he asked her to dinner, how fear had almost kept her from the greatest joy of her life. She was 60 now, her hair more gray than brown, her face lined with the years. But she had never felt more beautiful, more loved, more complete. She had a husband who cherished her, children who made her proud, a business that thrived, and a life that was rich in all the ways that mattered. The town of Bozeman had changed over the years, growing and modernizing with the passage of time. But some things remained constant. The store still stood on Main Street, now bearing the sign Edwards and Porter General Store in fresh gold paint. The mountains still loomed over the valley, their peaks snow-capped and majestic. And every Sunday, weather permitting, a silver-haired man and his wife could be seen riding through the countryside, their love as strong and steady as the mountains themselves. Charles married at 23, a lovely young woman named Alice who shared his passion for horses. They gave Penelope and Caleb their first grandchild, a girl they named Penelope, when Penelope herself was 62. Holding her tiny namesake in her arms, Penelope wept with joy, marveling at the fullness of her life. Catherine took over more of the store's operations as Penelope and Caleb began to slow down, proving herself to be an even shrewdness businesswoman than her mother. She did eventually marry, at 24, to a kind young man named David who supported her business ambitions. Together, they expanded the store, opening a second location in Helena that thrived under Catherine's management. On Penelope's 65th birthday, surrounded by her children, grandchildren, sister, and the husband she had loved for 27 years, she stood to make a toast. "When I was 38 years old," she began, her voice clear and strong despite her years, "I believed my life was essentially over. I believed that love and family and all the things I had dreamed of as a young woman had passed me by. The people in this town, kind as they were, reinforced that belief. I was too old, they said, too set in my ways, too independent, too plain, too everything and not enough of anything to hope for more." She paused, looking at Caleb, whose eyes were suspiciously bright. And then, a silver-haired cowboy rode into town on a cold October morning, and everything changed. He looked at me and saw not a spinster shopkeeper past her prime, but a woman worth knowing, worth loving, worth building a life with. He taught me that it is never too late, that age is just a number, that love can find you at any time if you are brave enough to reach for it. She raised her glass. To second chances, to the courage to defy expectations, to love that knows no age limit. And to my wonderful husband who proved them all wrong. To Caleb, everyone chorused, raising their own glasses. Later that night, as they prepared for bed in the comfortable house they had built a few miles outside of town, Caleb pulled Penelope into his arms. "That was quite a speech," he said, kissing her forehead. "It was the truth. You saved my life, Caleb Porter. No, we saved each other. I was just as lost as you were, just better at hiding it. We found each other at exactly the right time, and we built something beautiful together. We did we not? We did. And I would do it all again, exactly the same way, if it meant ending up here with you." They stood at the window, looking out at the mountains silhouetted against the star-filled sky, comfortable in the silence that comes from years of companionship and deep love. Somewhere in the house, their grandchildren were sleeping, visited by whatever dreams children dream. In town, their daughter was probably going over the store's ledgers, always the dedicated businesswoman. Their son was likely in the barn with his own children, teaching them about horses the way Caleb had taught him. It was a good life, a full life, a life that Penelope had not dared to dream possible all those years ago. "What are you thinking about?" Caleb asked, his breath warm against her hair. "I am thinking about how grateful I am that I answered the door that day. How grateful I am that I said yes to dinner, that I took a chance on love when everything told me I was too old for such foolishness. Best decision you ever made. Best decision we ever made." He turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face with the same tenderness he had shown 27 years ago. His silver hair gleamed in the lamplight, his storm cloud eyes were soft with love. He was 66 now, moving a bit slower, his limp more pronounced, but to Penelope he was as handsome as he had been the day they met. "I love you, Penelope Porter. I have loved you from the beginning, and I will love you until the end. I love you too, Caleb, always and forever." They kissed, a gentle press of lips that held decades of shared joy and sorrow, triumph and struggle, laughter and tears. It was the kiss of two people who had defied the odds, who had refused to let society's expectations limit their happiness, who had proven that love could bloom at any age. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the promise of another day, another sunrise, another chapter in the story of two people who found each other when the world said it was too late. But it was not too late. It was never too late. And they had proven them all wrong. The years that followed were peaceful and full. Penelope and Caleb grew old together with grace, supporting each other through the inevitable aches and pains of aging bodies. They watched their grandchildren grow, eventually welcoming great-grandchildren into the family. The store continued to thrive under Catherine's management, becoming a small chain of successful businesses throughout Montana. Charles's reputation as a horse trainer spread throughout the West, and he trained horses for some of the most prominent ranchers and settlers in the territory. He often brought his father along on consultations, the two of them working together with the easy rhythm of longtime partners. On their 35th wedding anniversary, Caleb and Penelope renewed their vows in the same little church where they had first married. It was a beautiful ceremony attended by what seemed like half the town, a testament to the love and respect they had earned over the years. When the preacher asked Penelope if she would take this man to be her husband, she answered with the same words she had given 35 years before. Yes. Caleb was 71 now, his silver hair white, his face deeply lined. But his eyes still held the same warmth and love they always had, and his hand in hers was still the most comforting feeling in the world. "Yes," he echoed when it was his turn, his voice strong despite his years. "Always yes." They lived to see Montana become a state in 1889, a momentous occasion that the entire territory celebrated. By then, Penelope was 73 and Caleb was 78. They sat on the porch of their home, holding hands and watching fireworks light up the night sky, marveling at how much the world had changed since they first met. "You ever regret it?" Penelope asked quietly. "Taking on a woman my age, starting over so late in life?" Caleb turned to look at her, and even in the dim light, she could see the absolute certainty in his eyes. "Not for one single moment. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Penelope. You and our life together. I thank God every day that I had the courage to walk into that store and ask you to dinner. I am glad you did too. I am glad I was brave enough to say yes. We were both brave, and look what that bravery brought us." He gestured to the house behind them where their family was gathered for the celebration. "A lifetime of love, that is worth any risk." "It is," Penelope agreed, squeezing his hand. "It absolutely is." Caleb passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cold January morning when he was 81 years old. Penelope, who had been sleeping beside him as she had for 38 years, woke to find him gone, his face peaceful, his hand still reaching for hers. The grief was devastating, a physical pain that threatened to crush her. But she was surrounded by love, her children and grandchildren gathering around her, supporting her through the darkest days. Margaret, now 84 herself and frail, sat with her sister for hours, the two of them sharing memories and tears. At the funeral, Penelope stood before the crowded church and spoke about the man she had loved. "Caleb Porter was my husband, my partner, my best friend and the love of my life," she said, her voice wavering but strong. "He came into my life when everyone, including myself, believed it was too late for love. He proved us all wrong. He showed me that age is no barrier to happiness, that courage and hope can transform everything." She paused, looking at the faces before her, their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and friends they had made over nearly 4 decades together. "I had 38 years with this man, and they were the happiest years of my life. I would not trade a single moment of them for anything. He taught me how to live, how to love, how to be brave, and I will carry that lesson with me until the day I join him." Penelope lived another 6 years without Caleb, surrounded by family and the legacy they had built together. She continued to visit the store occasionally, though Catherine ran it now with her own children helping. She spent time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather and the great love story that had defied all expectations. On a warm spring morning, shortly after her 80th birthday, Penelope Edwards Porter passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her last thoughts were of a silver-haired cowboy who had walked into her store on an October morning, who had looked at her as if she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, who had given her a life she had never dared to dream possible. They buried her beside Caleb, beneath a tall pine tree with a view of the mountains they had both loved. The headstone read, "Penelope Edwards Porter, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, it is never too late for love." Years later, when people in Bozeman told the story of Penelope and Caleb Porter, it was always with a sense of wonder and inspiration. They talked about the spinster shopkeeper who everyone said was too old for marriage, and the silver-haired cowboy who rode into town and proved them all wrong. They talked about the love that had bloomed late in life, but burned just as bright, if not brighter, than any young romance. Their store still stood on Main Street, now run by their great-grandchildren, a thriving business that served as a monument to their hard work and dedication. Their children and descendants spread throughout Montana and beyond, carrying with them the legacy of courage and hope that Penelope and Caleb had embodied. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the mountains, old-timers swore they could see 2 riders on the trails outside of town, A silver-haired man and the woman who loved him, riding together into the sunset, proving once and for all that true love knows no age, no limits, and no ending. It was never too late, they had shown everyone. Never too late for love, for happiness, for second chances, for building a beautiful life with someone who sees your true worth. Penelope and Caleb had defied expectations, broken through the barriers of age and society's narrow definitions of when and how love should happen. They had lived fully, loved completely, and left behind a legacy that would inspire generations to come. A legacy that said, take the chance, be brave. Say yes to love, no matter when it finds you. Because it is never, ever too late to find the person who will change your life forever. And in the end, that was the greatest gift they could have given, not just to their family, but to everyone who heard their story. Hope. The hope that somewhere out there, no matter your age or circumstances, your silver-haired cowboy or your remarkable woman might be waiting. And all you have to do is be brave enough to say yes when they finally arrive.